Nation, and in all the cultures that make our region their home. Please be advised today's meeting is available for public to attend virtually, is being streamed and recorded. I have no additions. Does council have any additions to the agenda today? No. CAO or staff? No. Everybody okay with the agenda? We're the only one on there. Okay. Is there anybody in the public who online? All right, that brings us to committee of the whole report 0923, the Animal Responsibility Program procurement for discussion. Staff?
Hi, Mayor and Council.
Yeah.
So this report provides an outline of the animal welfare work that's been completed over the last couple of years. As you see, it's quite in depth, and so I can go over the report. Happy to answer any questions, but I'll just start with a bit of a timeline as it's laid out. As you're aware, early in 2021, Takashi's wrote to council announcing their closure. Subsequently, a resolution was passed at that time to suspend euthanizing of animals. That's resulted in a requirement for all animals to be transferred to an animal rescue, which on occasion now leads to extended boarding at the pound shelter as sheltering services are not always available or appropriate. Say in the instances of full shelters are not operational or when there's feral cats. Early on in the work in the investigation, there was local stakeholder and SPCA engagement. At that time, it was noted that over a substantial period of time, animal related concerns were funneled to the animal rescue, maybe over social media, instead of managed through the animal control and pound keeping services, which in time led to an increased burden on the volunteer run animal rescue. Other areas identified through that process included limited public awareness regarding NRM, animal control, pound and licensing bylaw, and local animal welfare services, as well as a perceived absence or infrequent patrolling of animal control, and that there's no mechanism in place to manage public drop-off or surrendering of animals or complaints and concerns arising from outside the animal control boundary. Eventually, an expressions of interest process was carried out to identify any available animal services locally, and then an analysis of other community responses was provided to council. Through that analysis, it was found that municipalities typically have dedicated bylaw staff who respond to all bylaw enforcement issues, including animal control, and then have contracted services for animal rescue organizations on the side. Or a municipality might have a fulsome animal responsibility program under a single contract, which might be with a large organization such as the SPCA. Animal shelter operations have been an identified gap in the municipal services, and a development of a related contract opportunity, including that component, was recommended, and a request for proposals was initiated in late 2022 for the creation and delivery of a comprehensive animal welfare services program. Following that, 3 submissions were received, which offer animal control, pound keeping, and animal sheltering services individually. There were no submissions received offering all services under one agreement. In previous years, the NRM has typically paid a combined amount of $64,800 annually for animal control and pound keeping services. Last year, $3,400 in daily boarding fees was incurred for impounded animals awaiting transfer. And the anticipated spend for animal control services this year is $50,000, and it might be $40,000 for pound keeping if we include the rate we pay and plus any boarding fees. So the services proposed are outlined in the report, and options for council's consideration include continuing to provide existing animal control and pound keeping services and initiate an agreement for animal sheltering services, continue providing existing services and support a locally operating not-for-profit animal welfare organization, or continue just providing the basic services without consideration of animal welfare. Happy to answer any questions.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff happening over the last couple of years. Animal services is one of the most difficult things I've seen in communities in my experience. It seems to be a hard one to kind of grasp and get. I mean, it's easy to grasp, you don't need it to be done, but whether you get anybody to do it or not, that's a different story. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, okay.
Just looking for an example, what happens, let's say on a Saturday, there's a nuisance dog biting kids. Someone makes a call. What happens at that point, right now with the level of service we have right now?
So currently, the animal control is responsible for 8:30 to 4:30 Monday to Friday. In the event of an emergency, residents are directed to call RCMP to respond if there's an animal biting kids. Animal control does have the ability within their contract to do 100 hours varied for patrolling. So if they're in the community or if they're around, they may stop in, and that's not prescribed, but they have to be within like an hour of response time, Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 4:30. So unless they're in the community, they wouldn't necessarily respond. Like if they were patrolling at that time and they saw it, then they would act, but otherwise a resident would be directed to call the RCMP for an emergency or 911.
Thank you. Question?
At 4, if you want me to ask them. At 4.
Let's go one at a time, please. We'll see where it goes, unless they're all interrelated somehow.
No, I just want to make sure I get to ask all 4.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one is under the animal control on, it's under the 77,100. Thanks. So it says, under this option, animal control officer availability between 8:30 to 4:30, Monday to Friday. My question is, could this be any 5-day period, given that especially in the spring, summer, and fall, there is a lot more sidewalk activity or outdoor activity on Saturday and Sunday. And so if $77,100 buys us a 5-day period, could they include the Saturday and the Sunday? Because we could offset the Monday and the Tuesday with municipal staff as we're doing now. That's one question.
Great. So that's a good question. And I think in any contract negotiations that would follow, I think those are the questions that we would be sorting out with the provider. So yeah, like I think my understanding is that the current contract offers this. It's laid out in there, and then there might be some complications with the bylaws or the person answering the phone, the bylaw admin that answers the phone that transfers the call. But I think there's room to negotiate what exactly the contract looks like.
Okay, not part of my 4 question. This is a follow-up.
Okay.
It also says 8:30 to 4:30, so that's an 8-hour block. Could it be any 8-hour block? Like, could it be 10 to 6? Yeah.
Yeah.
What would we be, like, I'm just looking to expand services without increasing a whole pile of costs, right? Because we do have some staff that are working 8:30 to 4:30 on Friday, and we could maybe offset that with a contractor that's doing.
Yeah, I think that time, those days are based on the staff availability to answer and transfer the phone. But one of the things that did get worked out in the whole process was a change in the dispatch. So I think that probably could be negotiated in the contract and just would require rewriting of how that works.
Okay.
In a new agreement.
So Aaron, We don't call animal services directly, it comes to a switchboard first before, is that the way that it's handled? It comes to an internal switchboard to call?
At one time, we were having an animal control line that was actually answered at the fire hall, but I believe that the dispatching now goes straight to the animal control officer.
Yeah, that,
I don't think there's a staff person now that does that
Okay.
intermediate step.
Well,
I think it's a
because I was
direct.
wondering, so the question popped up in my mind once you gave that answer, well, who is the dispatcher? You know, it's not going directly to the.
At one time, it was the fire assistant, fire
Right.
services assistant, but I believe it goes direct now to animal control officer.
yeah, that's,
Whoever has the contact.
Yes.
Okay.
that's correct. And then, so then it would, the contractor would have to agree to a different time, right? So that's the difference in the two amounts there, the 77,000 and the 189,000. Because they are gonna need to have to not answer their phone for certain times. So a time, I don't know that the time has to be that, but it definitely would need to be an agreed upon.
12 hours a day, 7 days a week needs more than one person, right? So now you're paying wages for at least 2, maybe 3 people, and so that's how I figured it. It jumped so high, more than double, right? Just by providing 12 hours on weekend, so. Okay. Second question?
So under pound keeping, it says, out of town veterinary care, 500 per trip plus veterinary expenses. So I'm reading that an animal has to go to the vet out of town, whoever is taking that animal gets $500 for expenses. And then we pay that, the NRM pays that, and then the NRM is also responsible for the veterinary expenses. Is that open-ended? Is there a maximum amount? Who decides all of that? How does that happen?
Yeah, thanks. So this is, I think, historic wording in the contract. And with the contract having been out of the same provider for the last number of years, in asking what that looks like, what do those veterinary expenses look like? It sounds like there might be some conversation between the experts that are involved to determine if the animal, you know, if it's an appropriate case for going out of town for veterinary care in the first place. If the animal, you know, would survive a trip, say if it was really dire circumstances. And maybe also there's conversation with the chief bylaw officer to get confirmation on that trip happening and what the veterinary expenses might look like. So there is conversation between the contractor and the staff to confirm.
And then just as a follow-up, do you know how much has been spent on veterinary expenses in year in 2022? Because we're only right. So in the 2022, what do you have any idea of what we paid?
I don't think there was any, but I don't know 100%. There might be one trip. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, and then at the
number 3.
no worries. Thanks. Under animal shelter operations, 36,000, daily boarding at 25 to 75 per day per animal. I'm not sure what the difference would be, but I'm wondering, is there a maximum like amount as to what we would pay for boarding until that animal could be rehomed or transferred somewhere else? Like it could stay there for a year, or do we have a maximum amount?
Yeah, in the proposal, there wasn't a maximum amount, and the difference in the price was based on a variety of factors like neutered or spayed or nursing or with litter of animals or not, maybe aggressive or not, and no maximum, no. So it was a daily boarding rate.
Just,
But last year we spent 3,400 on boarding.
Yes, but that was at the pound, and so that was because there was no option for animals to be transferred out. So there was the resolution that says animals can't be euthanized, and then there was a point where there were some feral cats that were impounded,
Mhm.
and the SPCA didn't have room for the cats, and so they stayed in the pound for an extended period of time before they were able to be altered and released, which is the SPCA policy.
Hmm.
that was
trap
part of the
alterations.
$3,400 or in addition to the $3,400?
That is part of it, and also that might have been bed expenses, or maybe they had to be boarded until the visiting vet was able to do that.
So that was a one-time case that was probably a good chunk of that 3,400. So normally it might not be as high as 3,400 in an average year for kennel expenses or boarding expenses. Yes, I'm trying to get at, you know what,
I think the problem is with the fair.
yeah.
Yeah.
So is it 5,000 some years, 10,000 other years, or is 3,400, 3,500, is that kind of a
Yeah.
ballpark figure, average figure, I guess, over time?
It's difficult to know. I hadn't, I only looked at the invoices from 2022.
Right, right.
And then prior to all of this, in 2021 and prior, there was Takashi's Animal Rescue was facilitating almost all of the boarding of animals, so there wasn't a lot of animals at the pound.
So at the very bottom of that page, it says option for cats only and emergency backup dog pound keeping services, $20,000. And then daily board, what, can you explain to me what this option is all about?
Yeah, so this proposal again has a dedicated cat enclosure facility. So essentially what they're offering or suggesting is that they are able to provide a higher level of care for cats if, say, the municipality only wanted to board dogs at a pound, then this other provider would be able to provide the cat impounding facility, as well as be an emergency for if there was a need for more dog impounding.
Is my question.
Okay, I had a question about the expected expenses for this year. What it was 50, well, where did I read it? 50,000 based on the current contract. Where does the current contract, how much of that is, or how much of that is veterinary services and or out of town expenses?
So I noticed it might have been a little ambiguous this morning when I was reading this, because I have the anticipated spend for animal control services in 2023 is 50,000 based on the current contract. And that's actually only for animal control. That's not for animal welfare services altogether. So that amount is based off the current contract. So there was an animal control contract that was that ended, and then it went out for bid, and two proponents bid on it, and then the first proponent did it for a little while and then they stopped. So then the contract was provided to the other. And so that's what that amount is based off of. That's how much they were willing to do it for. And so the existing pound keeping contract is 33,600 a year, plus that $500 per trip for veterinary, and then boarding fees apply after the 72-hour window.
But no
So there's no,
control activities.
right, that's
No
just for
control
impounding.
Just pound.
Yeah. And there's no sort of anticipated amount that might be for daily boarding. I just kind of I thought, okay, if 3,400 was the spend in 2022, then I don't know what it would look like in 2023.
Have we asked whoever has been picking up animals over the last several years to keep any kind of statistics? I mean, it's, you know, there's quite a difference between the different types of dogs you might pick up. There's our situation, right? There's dangerous dogs, there's aggressive dogs, and then there's the dogs that just wander in a neighborhood that aren't any of those other two. And so do we know what those are? Well, you know, I'm just trying to get a feel for them around. I'm just trying to get a feel for what the problem is. Have we had several aggressive dogs? Have we had dangerous dogs that we've had to deal with? Or is this mainly dogs and cats that are wandering?
Yeah, so both the contracts for animal control and pound keeping require reporting and tracking. In reviewing the reports, the animals that are picked up are typically this household pets that are wandering. There hasn't been any in the last couple of years, to my knowledge, of dangerous or animals that, like, in discussion with, say, Dawson Creek or Fort St. John, with their bylaw department, they've kind of raised the warning that somebody might be moving to your community with this dog or whatnot. We haven't had any of that, to my knowledge, here. Again, I think there's been a lot of work done from the animal shelter or the non-for-profit in relation to, like, education about animal welfare issues. And I think that they informally or anecdotally might have a lot of different information that we don't have.
Also, Roper, you asked a question specifically about dogs that bite kids on the weekends. Has it been a problem or is it just a concern that you have?
I was just looking for a hypothetical situation, kind of a worst case type of thing. I haven't heard a lot about any vicious or dangerous dogs, but that doesn't mean that we won't happen upon that situation.
I've reached out to a few people just because I'm on a bunch of different peace of minds with when it comes to all the different layers to this. And kind of repeating what I hear is we've got complaints with dogs after the animal control hours. Noise, off leash, simple little things, like not aggressive behaviors. Like, I'm sure that it does come up, but that's not what I'm hearing. So I like these options, especially the one that gives us 12 hours a day. But do we need 12 hours a day? I'm not hearing a lot of need for the times between like 10 a.m. till 3 p.m. for animal control. It's when the kids and families are heading to work and school, and when people are home and doing their things on the weekend. So I think it's more of an after hours needed for the animal control is where I'm trying to wrap my head around it all. And none of these options give us a great coverage on those hours. Most people are at work during the day, and if there's a noisy dog or a wandering dog, it's not going to get reported as often as when people are home. And I think that's where we might need some better coverage. So I'm just trying to figure out how to make that work.
Yeah, and then one thing to pick dogs up during those after hours, you have to then take them somewhere. Yeah, so your pound keeping services have to match.
And then
Yeah, well, they do from Monday to Friday, but not on the weekend, right?
Yeah, it says in here, the pound operating hours are from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Daily.
daily.
Every
So
Sunday?
It says daily, yeah. I would just, guess I just want to say a few words about, this whole situation is near and dear to my heart. Those of you that have been on council with me for the last 2 terms know, that I've had several terrible encounters with animals at large. And I think that the person that is currently holding the contract is doing an amazing job at, in a positive way, talking to people with their animals off leash, dealing with situations as they're arising, So I would not want us to see, I would not want to see us reduce services in any way. I think that it's very much needed, because as soon as people knew that we didn't have stabilized domestic animal control, there was a far greater number of large dogs running loose. So there are people that are afraid of dogs. There's little dogs out there. There's kids going to school. Like, there have been awful situations in the past. So yeah, that's my feeling on it.
Well, I tend to agree that municipalities, it's a safety issue, and so municipalities need to have some level of enforcement. Just what level, do you need $200,000 worth, or, or do you need, is the existing working well enough? If we're picking up mostly non-dangerous animals, with the existing contract, that's fine. If we can add to that contract somehow so that they can respond to aggressive or animals that are causing a safety issue rather than just at large, then I think that's probably worth expanding from the existing service to making sure that aggressive animals are picked up at least as a minimum, which means you probably have to negotiate that with one of these contractors. I would say. That's my thoughts on it. I'm prepared to work with everybody to expand the services some way, I'm hearing it's after hours weekends. That's not what I read here, except for a very exceptional, to me, extreme cost to provide it, that. If we're going to that level, it's now we're in a order of magnitude of putting together our own bylaw enforcement department. Right? $200,000, you start looking at that, you start looking at what are the costs of, I know from my past experience, we were looking at $150,000 for a person and the truck to do consistent bylaw enforcement, and then you start adding more people on depending on how you want to do that. So when you start getting, to this very high level, you've got to start thinking about bringing it in-house. Councilor,
Just a couple of thoughts. I mean, we're discussing now about potentially shifting the hours from daytime to evenings and weekends. That can have an impact on the provider going from that daytime schedule to evening. As someone that works evenings and weekends, it's not an ideal situation, especially for someone that has a young family. But we're just looking at the numbers here. I mean, we're looking at more than double the cost for just an additional 29 hours on top of the 40 hours. You would think that, to add 29 hours, it would be a portion of that full 40 hours that we're all paying. Perhaps instead of having one provider, put in the overtime and not getting days off, or having them responsible for that second person, maybe there's a second contract that we can put out there for evenings and weekends. That would be more in line, emergencies, whatever it might be, but more in line with the cost that we're paying now, possibly even reduce, instead of 40 hours, we're looking for 30 hours. And we could possibly get the same deal we're getting now.
Your idea about expanding the bylaw enforcement, that's an idea that's been tossed around the idea for a long time. We have a lot of bylaws and a very passive way of enforcing them. So maybe that is something that we look at, we beef up some bylaw enforcement, and part of that's our animal control bylaw. Like, I'm not saying it all needs to be brought into house, but the more we look at our bylaws and we're updating and looking at all of it, I'm sure we're going to need some sort of enforcement unless we agree to continue with our passive system, which has been proven not to be the most effective as of late. And maybe that's something we need to do, is look at building a bylaw enforcement area and having animal control to be part of it. Future looking, if we have expansions and everything else, having it set up now, it might help us in the future. Just a thought.
right? What would you like to do? Is there anybody else who has any questions or comments?
I just be repeating.
Yeah.
And I am just wondering about, I didn't hear from anybody else about the veterinary costs. How does everybody feel about that open-ended veterinary costs? If anybody wants to speak. I'll talk to her for sure.
Just a question for staff. We do have a veterinary service local to the community now. I don't know exactly what services they offer and what the timelines are. Is there any chance that we can shift that out of town cost to a local provider with a contract or something?
Yeah, I do know that whenever possible, it goes either to the local provider or the visiting vet, I think. From what I know is offers more services, so in the instances of those feral animals, they were the visiting vet provided those.
The new vet service is currently not offering any emergency services at all. Hopefully that will change in the upcoming years, but for right now, there is no emergency
Or
services.
spay neuters. For spay neuters.
Right.
I have just one follow-up question. So like for my family, we have insurance on our pet, so if anything happens to her, we're mostly covered. Is there some sort of mechanism where we can pay for some sort of insurance that would cover high cost of the animal care, if we had to send to a veterinarian? Is that something that exists for organizations such as us?
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. I haven't researched that, but it's a good point.
This thing that from the insurance. All of a sudden you got a municipality, everybody who has a problem with the dog, it brings it to the municipality and then the insurance provider, just. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, except if there's some expert opinions with respect to which cases go to the out of town. And I don't know enough about what we've been doing to really understand. It's gonna take a while, I think, before we can explore all the options of pulling in-house and developing a full bylaws. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've been talking about it before. Sounds like you have, but that doesn't happen, in one budget cycle, I don't believe. I'm up for talking to one of these contractors. Because I don't know them, to see which one is the most amiable to consider these hour switches. That Councilor Gerwing has talked about, whether it's negotiation with respect to the existing fees and cutting back, or whether they won't do it at all, or whether it's a matter of increasing the cost by a little bit, so I think maybe we're at that point that we should negotiate with one or more of these to see if that's an option. Sorry, Councilor Schultz.
Well, this is a fairly fulsome report. Thank you for I really like it that we covered a lot of the reports that we've got to lead up to where we are. One thing that I'll remind us all of is that when some of the previous decisions were made, such as to stop the euthanasia, to steer animals more into a support system, when Takashi's was operating. When we had Takashi's operating, there was actually a more rounded systems, because we both had the ability to have a pound, you had the ability to have a pound keeper, and you had the ability for like a rehab mechanism of some form. So if the dog couldn't go back home, the rehoming was possible, or the neutering was possible under that umbrella. So the two sides of it were funded, and the one side, the service, the animal care service, was a volunteer. And so it eventually fell off the table for being overloaded, because everything ended up there rather than the other places. So yeah, either, I think going forward in the long run, we're going to either have to address the animal care, animal rescue idea, and find a way of not fully funding something like that, but partially helping to fund something like that. And in some ways you can take from Peter to pay for Paul. Like and either you fund some of the animal care system, or you'll fund the vet trips to far away and the expense that comes with that. So, but as to where we are today, like I just give that as a better, I think that a rounded system is that way. But it bothers me that that when you start looking at a fulsome system and you start looking at a couple $100,000 to run a system like that. And you realize that it's very different from running a golf course where you have willing participants who want to go play golf. And you have willing participants in the library and in the Phoenix Theater and the museum, all of whom want to participate in those things. And now you look at the system that's required by the municipality that's there to deal with the people who won't look after their dogs or their cats. And that's actually a problem. That's a serious problem, because the problem that we face is that we have to provide a solution in the follow-up, but we don't have input into the why is this the way it is? Why do we have this huge cost to deal with a problem where it actually is the responsibility of pet owners to actually address this problem? So that is so difficult to manage because we don't want to put the onus on the animal and make it the animal's fault. And yet at the same time, there are people that are behind this that need an education and they need restrictions on them from actually, like rants and raves is a wonderful educational tool. It really is. Like right now, you can watch when there are animals at large, almost anywhere in the community. And almost every time the owners are found and a dog is identified and the dog gets picked up and goes home and everything's fine. It's actually a system that's sort of working. But the system, when you, as was mentioned, in the absence of an effective dog catching or animal management system, there were dogs that when people go to work, there's people that open the gate and let the dogs out, and so that the dog can run free and be free, because I'm free and the dog should be free. Like there's that. How do we address that part of the problem so that we don't get into the need for a really, really elaborate system? That's where I'm at. But as far as today, and I'll go back to today, I think that negotiating with our contractors is the right, like the hours of service, and that with our contractors is the right thing to do now. I think that's the way to manage it. And I know that we've had some turnover in our service providers, there lots of turnover. And I agree that the current person that's looking at that is the right person to actually both do a lot of educating and a lot of talking with individuals and has the knowledge of the animals. And so I don't think we have to go to a complete elaborate system until we start building on what we have now.
Okay, a couple of points of clarification for me then from that. I guess first of all, the decision not to euthanize, is that just as obvious as it is, that it's brutal and that way we made that decision, or did somebody come to us and say that the government says you shouldn't be doing that?
It was a call. It was a public comment at the end of the council meeting. But it was in March, I think, and it followed the announcement in February from Takashi's that they were closing.
Right, and so there was euthanasia services prior to that?
It was always part of the contract that after 72 hours, animals would be euthanized, but it was that animals would be rehomed or adopted. And then if, in other cases, they would be euthanized, humane destruction.
Right.
But it should be noted that there was like one animal that was euthanized in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Right.
And then.
Well, that was because we had a service though that was rehoming them? No, they just, somebody always came and picked them up because of the potential euthanasia of the dog.
Well, and I think historically, the animal control officer and the pound worked together and just rehomed animals that needed homes informally.
Yeah.
Even before.
Even before Takashi.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then-
it was informal.
Just to note that there is currently an animal rescue, North Paw Animal Rescue is operating.
Yes.
So Takashi's closed, and then there was a span of time, maybe a year, that there was not anything, but North Paw is operating again, and the public education is something that they do from their various platforms.
But they don't board dogs.
But they're not boarding
Boarding
dogs, they are facilitating foster care.
Right, yeah, okay. So any dogs that are in care are in care at the pound,
Right,
paying $25 to $75 a day.
a day for that.
Mhm.
And last year it was $3,400. So then we do have a contractor, or we do have an outfit who is nonprofit, who is prepared to take on the specific services of animal shelter or animal welfare.
Yeah, animal
Absolutely.
sheltering, facilitating rehome, adoption and fostering. Public education, rehoming and rehabilitation of abandoned and surrendered animals.
So that's the bottom option of it.
36,000.
36,000, but it includes daily boarding.
Right,
So
so
that's
this,
what confused me. Is
So
it the same service, not the same people, but is pound keeping the same as animal shelter operations? Like is it just worded, called something different, but it's the same service?
yeah, so like Walt Disney didn't do any favors by using the term pound, but
Right.
essentially the pound keeping contract that bid would be like an animal sheltering bid, except that the proponent did not note that rehoming or facilitating adoption was a part of the services that they could provide at that time.
Okay,
And it hasn't historically been included in the contract formally, I don't think.
And surrendering isn't something covered by the pound.
And the animal shelter operations recap here does not indicate that they're willing to operate as a pound. Right, so that is the distinction. So let me just see if I have this correct. The animal control officer picks up cat or a dog and takes it to the pound. And the cat or the dog stays at the pound until an owner is found or it's rehomed or something.
72 hours.
So the animal shelter operations, this indicates that it isn't interested in being that pound. So if we were to, let's just say we went animal control, then the pound keeping and added on the animal shelter, what that would look like is the dog or the cat gets picked up, it goes to the pound for 3 days, and then it's transferred to the animal shelter operations until an appropriate home can be found. Yes?
Yeah, that's correct. And that, then I guess to note that these are all proponents, business proponents. There's not a not-for-profit organization here.
Okay.
And I think I would just go back to one of those reports that talked about what other municipal responses are and maybe reference the Dawson City response, which is that they have dedicated bylaw and the bylaw officer would pick up an animal at large and transfer to the Dawson City Animal Shelter. And after 3 days, the Dawson City transfers ownership of the animal to the animal shelter, which then can sell or facilitates like the rehoming process and then can sell or charge their fees or whatnot.
Okay, so the portion about boarding of cats, so I'm looking at page 5 of 6, the animal shelter operations, boarding of cats and dogs following expiry of 72. So they're not doing the 72 hours. Okay, so they're either working in conjunction with the pound or, so they're saying, we don't want the animal until the 73rd hour. Yeah, and that'll cost 36,000 to deal with that after that. Plus the pound. So we're talking about, that's a doubling of the pound service that we have now, essentially is what that is. To provide that welfare bit.
In cost, yeah.
Yeah. And that's where your recommendation of $142,000 comes from.
Yeah, the 140,000 bit is, the three of those, animal control, pound keeping and animal shelter operations. The 77,000, the 33,600, and then the base 36,000. But that does not include the daily boarding fees.
Or that. fees.
Or vet fees. That would be incurred.
Well, let's go back to the contractors then with respect to the control bit and find out if there's any wiggle room around the hours of operation. Because the final amount will change accordingly.
An emergency on call.
Well, we can even put that up there, yeah. Emergency on call bit.
8:30 to 4:30. Just said, no,
Well,
like noon to 8, like.
So I agree that you'd want, why can't we shut the hours, but they put these in specific. Maybe they have to put it in specific to what their individual needs are, or what historically has happened. So by talking to them, they just might, no, we can't do it outside of that hour. That becomes it, but we should have that conversation with them anyway. I sense there's a willingness to want to do the sheltering bit. I think it's maybe too open-ended, which also becomes a negotiation thing. But I'm sensing from everybody that we need to have a pound and we want to do the animal shelter bit. It's just, are we picking up the animals at the appropriate time, and are the service times appropriate for what the community wants? So, that we've done that with that 9 to 5 thing, Monday to Friday. So now it's just a matter of, when we get complaints, sounds like, about the off hours. So now it's a matter of trying to cover those off hours. So let's go back to the contractor, see if we can do that, and come back with the total cost. And, except for the open-endedness of the other two contracts, 36,000 a year doesn't seem that, unrealistic to me. As long as it's not an open-ended thing, but I don't know how you cap that, except, right? So the first dogs that come in that need veterinary services, they get dealt with, and then once the cap is reached, no other dog gets that. Like, it's really hard to try to figure out what the max is there. Either that, or we talk to a veterinarian and try to figure out some kind of policy around when should a dog go to a veterinarian, and when should it be euthanized.
Yeah, like, are we going to pick up the vet bills for all the feral cats? Like, that
Yeah, and
Like, I mean that respectfully, like, it's a
Yeah.
question that we need to answer, like, it could be a lot.
a lot. Yeah, and I don't know that's our responsibility.
So there is an option in here, just for consideration, is to continue our existing service and support our local operating not-for-profit organizations like North Paws. But it still could be a community expense, and maybe it could fall under our community grants, community groups funding structure. Maybe North Paws or an organization like that running as a non-for-profit might be in our interest to support. We might be able to support something like that without the extra costs, without having to have an annual cost of 36,000. That I think maybe then we're getting the education in there. It might just be a more cost-effective way about it too. Instead of guaranteeing a contract for the sheltering, acknowledging we want it and supporting it through a different avenue.
Yeah, see, I don't know anything about that, because I don't know that Paz is in this report, or if they were the ones that put in, like, you guys have got knowledge I don't have.
Yeah.
Right, with respect to those potential options. So, if that option is available to us, I've got a question. We used to have an SPCA here back in the day, and so I don't know the history of why they ended up, is it because they weren't supported? If we're gonna start supporting that.
Do you want me to speak to that? Do you have information on the SPCA?
I could just say that we definitely were corresponding with them like all of 2021, and they had some ideas and then they didn't, and they've been invited to bid on every one of the expressions of
Yeah.
interest, RFPs, and.
But they don't have a local presence.
Right, and they had said that they would, and then there was emergencies in other areas of the province, and so they haven't come back.
I see, yeah. I got it.
And at the time, they weren't interested.
Yeah, because I know I do know, because it does talk about Dawson Creek there, it's, you know, cost anything from 123, Dawson Creek went through a very big rebuild for the SPCA, and in order to attract them to the community, to help them with their animal control issues that they had. So I know they are in the north, but, so anyways, once you start thinking that, the way you're thinking, well, if we've got this nonprofit organization with this needs somehow,
Yeah.
well, then maybe the SPCA should be, if it's just a matter of money, if that's why they pulled out, well, then you're talking to them again about that. Let's find out if we can get the pickup, the control service in place. And then we can go to the other two contractors at least and or the veterinarian and find out what is it that we can do to try to cap those expenses that are open-ended. And that will give us a dollar figure. And obviously the budget will need to be amended. If you put 50,000 in this year budget for that service. Is that what's in the budget?
But, yeah, I think that's what's in the bylaw budget or the fire department budget.
There's currently $90,000 in professional services in the bylaw, protective services bylaw for animal control, which is pound keeping and animal control.
Okay, so there's 90,000 there.
In your what you've currently seen, there's been $90,000. But that also includes a little bit of I don't know the exact amount because James does that budget.
Sure.
But it does include a small amount for daily boarding and expected vet expenses, but not a large amount. We're talking like a couple thousand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then I guess the point I was trying to get at is whatever we have in the budget right now is not gonna be enough to carry off potential full services that we're talking about. So how soon might we be able to talk to the contractor? Well, their hours of service.
Yeah, I think that can all start taking place. And then with the animal control and the pound, I guess just one clarifying question, maybe following Councillor Andrews' questions about the animal sheltering operations. I'm hearing that there might be some things that are maybe considered municipal and others that aren't. And then under that bullet, there's say feral colony management. So I guess one option could be to do an RFQ for the services that council does feel should be offered municipally. So then there might be an opportunity to do those negotiations with the contractors for pound keeping and animal control, as well as bring back costs for if there was an RFQ done on the services that council did feel would be a municipal service. I don't know.
My gut feel is that puts us back to where we were already.
Yeah.
Right, that's my gut, is that now we're here, at least we have a start of a proposal. If you go back and they just say, no, we're not, we don't want to flex our hours, then we're back to the drawing board, I think. But if they're prepared to flex their hours, and then you'll bring that back. They are, they aren't, and we'll have to go from there. I would like to include this potential service in the budget, which means we need to have something by the 19th. Some bit of an idea what the, if there's gonna be an increase, what I'm like that.
Sorry, so just to clarify, so you would like staff to go back to our current animal control and pound keeping contractors to see if we could adjust.
No, I think the town was fine. I think
Town
it's
was
the
fine,
animal
okay.
control.
So it's our current animal control officers to vary their hours so that we could get some expanded availability, weekends, after work, those types of hours. But we would also have to expand the pound keeping hours because that pound would then have to be open to receive any particular animals that would be collected.
Well, even if we had service till 7 o'clock,
Just till 7,
like,
okay.
and I'm not meaning to imply that we should be adding on, I'm just.
So, yes,
scheduling
adjusting,
those hours,
yeah,
right? So
adjusting,
the
okay.
same, what, 8 hours, whatever it happened to be 40 hours a week, but let's
Okay.
just do it at a time And then, sorry, do you want to continue, because I have another question about it.
Sorry. And then in terms of animal shelter, any kind of animal sheltering, what are council's wishes on that particular item?
Here's my question around that. So,
Go ahead.
sorry.
If it has to do with that,
It does.
yeah.
Okay, so when I'm reading the bullets under pound keeping and reading the bullets under animal shelter operations, the pound keeping is doing a lot of what the animal shelter has proposed, except for, like, as I'm reading it, the public can't drop off dogs and cat or whatever domestic animals to them. So that would be the one big difference, right? And providing education on animal wellness. So there might be some duplications, like a lot of duplications of services between these two, but there are some pieces missing in the pound that the
The
animal
pound
shelter-
will only deal with animals that have owners. It doesn't deal with animals that have no owners. So does that's also the distinction. The pound will only deal with animal that has, it will only rehome to an owner. Like, so if you lost your dog or your dog, it will not rehome to a non-owner, like it will
Yeah.
rehome an animal. It will send the animal back to its original home again.
How do they know? How do they know? They don't for 72 hours. Unless it got a tag.
They would use the tag system, or the person would know that that was their dog that's missing,
That's
they
where
would
they
come
would
and
find
claim their dog.
Mhm.
But they don't advertise to rehome animals
Right.
typically, or, yeah.
So kind of what I'm hearing is a request for 3 services. We're kind of looking at this as a pound keeping, so the first 72 hours. We need our sheltering operations for the 73 plus hours, and we need our animal control where we want to manipulate the hours a bit to get more fulsome coverage.
Right.
Okay.
And that's what, and I think it starts with animal control to see if we can get those hours that and then from there, if you've got a contractor who, and I don't know if it's an existing contractor or not, I put this in, but if they are prepared to change those hours, then you have to determine whether the pound, will be open to accept animals. And it shouldn't matter after that, because the pound will take it to the animals, shelter during regular business.
Yeah.
It's not so, like, that's a planned process, right? So it's the unplanned process is we pick up a dog and they're not open. What do we do with the dog? So that has to come after we determine what the hours look like. So if we can, talk to the proponent for animal control about hours. And then, bring an answer back to us, hopefully before I email it to us, if you want to. We have a bit of an idea. Go ahead.
So in terms of providing service, so the contract requires that the animal control officer be available to receive a phone call between 8:30 to 4:30, but patrol times could be already on a Saturday or after 4:30 or before 8:30. So when you're speaking about providing the service, are you looking at that they would receive a call at a different set of hours, but that the patrols they're currently doing are probably okay?
Go ahead. I have nothing to offer on that question. I'm
I
afraid.
don't know whether the vehicle is identified. I haven't seen, the current holder actually out there patrolling. I know he or she is, but I haven't seen that, so I don't know whether they're appropriate or not. But my hope is that we could somehow provide service for residents outside of 4:30. That if they need assistance, that
They can call and
they
be
can
answered.
call and
Okay.
get an answer, yeah. And then, sorry to be grudges, and I know people have to go, but under the animal shelter operations, and I don't know that we have to do this today, but I think it's worth having a discussion about. Does council feel that this is our responsibility to be providing this service for, what those points, like, how many of those points do we want to support or not? I think it's just worth having. And then, sorry, and then could we get the veterinary bills from the past couple of years?
Mhm.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that those are very good questions, and it's information I think that we need to decide, and that's why I asked the question about the euthanasia. If, you know, the animal shelter operations almost flow from that decision.
Yeah.
If you're not going to do responsible euthanasia, then what in the community is it, you know, so you just can't have dogs impounded forever, you gotta do something with them, so. All right,
And just to clarify a little bit more for my thoughts on it, Jaylene, is like the hours of operations proposed and what we're currently using. I think is providing a decent service, a good service. I'm not sure how much alteration needs to happen there, but I think there needs to be the availability of an emergency on call or something. Because it's those after hours when people are feeling helpless and there's nobody to call. And having some sort of response program for that, and I don't know exactly what that would look like, but. And it might not happen at all. I do 24-hour on call in my business and a completely different business. Whoever's on call gets an extra stipend for that week because they're expected to answer the call after hours. So I'm sure there's a system that could be looked at.
I know how it works. I've owned a lot of animals for a long time. If there's a cow out anywhere around Port Nelson, I get a call.
does it become part of your herd at that point?
It actually, no, it actually became incumbent upon me to know who owned cows and say, well, I think that's probably so-and-so's cow.
Is it a black cow or a brown cow?
All right,
It works.
we weren't able to come to any kind of final decision on this, so. But I think hopefully you've got some information from us on how we'd like to proceed, and we'll obviously need to deal with this. Hopefully some of that information can come back before the 19th. So that we can consider whether or not an amendment to the budget or the draft budget is necessary. With that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thanks very much.